Welcome back to the shop, part 2 of the suspension and chassis setup series. In this video, I'm going to jump right into the rear end sag, and then we're going to talk about fork height adjustments and then spring rates. Or at least I'm going to try to get through all that in this video. I'll get as far as I can, and if it becomes too long, then we'll put the rest of it in part 3, but let's go ahead and dig into it. Alright, your race sag, rider sag, they're both the same thing, however you want to call it. For sake of this video, I'm going to try to stick with calling it race sag. I might goof up and call it rider sag from time to time, but they're both the same thing. That is when you're sitting on the bike. Your body's weight is on the bike, and when we're checking the sag, it's going to be real important to keep your butt directly over the foot pegs. And while you're checking the racer sag, it's pretty important to have all your gear on, at least the heavy parts of your gear, your helmet, the boots, whatever you wear that has some significant weight to it. Also, make sure the bike is nice and clean. You don't need dirt stuck to the bike, adding weight to the bike. That way you get a good, accurate reading. Now, then we also have static sag. Static sag is the sag on the rear end when the bike is just sitting on its own weight. There's no rider on the bike. Now, in my opinion, static sag is probably more important than racer sag, but we'll discuss that in a couple minutes. Let's go ahead and check the static sag on this bike first. Now, anymore, they have fancy little digital tools to check your racer sag. I don't really think that's necessary. I'm just going to be using a measuring tape here. And again, after we run through this, I'm going to tell you my real take of how I handle my own personal sag. But just for sake of the guys that don't know how to do this, we're going to run through it the old-fashioned way with the measuring tape. So we're going to want to measure from the rear axle. I usually hook the measuring tape right to the bottom of the threaded part of the axle right here. And you want to run a pretty vertical line up to the rear fender, or at least follow the swing of the rear swing arm. So I already have a black mark right there where I'll be lining the measuring tape up to get a reading. That thing's been there forever. I think I put that there when I first put the bike together. So let's first get a reading of the rear end fully extended. So your bike has to be on the stand with the rear end fully extended, and we need to get that reading real quick. So let's do that. 600. Sorry guys, I got OCD. 662 millimeters. So let's go write that down. All right, got that written down. 662 millimeters full extend. Now that we need to take the same measurement but with the bike on its wheels, all the weight of the bike on its wheels, and we're going to be taking two measurements this time. First, we're going to push down on the bike and let it come up on its own. Take a measurement, write that down. And then we're going to lift up on the bike and let it come down on its own. Take that measurement, write it down. Then we'll divide or add them two up and divide it by 2 to get the static sag reading. The reason you do that is that kind of removes the little bit of static friction that is in all the bearings and everything like that. So let's do that. All right, so I'm going to take it off the stand. What I like to do is just use my knee right here to kind of balance the bike. Get the measuring tape all set up. Okay, now I'm going to pull down the bike and then let it come up nice and slow. I'm slowly going to let it up. And I'm getting a reading of 624 millimeters. Okay, now I'm going to lift up on it and bring it down slowly. 628. So 624 and 628. Okay, got it all written down here. The full extension, when the bike was on the stand, measuring the full extension of the rear end, measured 662 millimeters. Then we checked the static sag by first pushing down on the bike and letting it come up on its own, and that was 624 millimeters. Then we pulled up on it and let it fall down on its own, and that was 628 millimeters. We add them two together, we have 1,252. So then we take 1,252, divide that by 2, and we get 626. What this number is basically is the average of these two. It's right in the middle, so that's why we did that, to get that number. So now we take the 626. Well, we actually take the 662, the full extension, put it down here, and then we take the 626 and we subtract it from the 662, the full extension, and that's going to give us the static sag reading of 36 millimeters. So this bike has a static sag of 36 millimeters. Now we need to check the racer sag. To measure the racer sag, obviously we're going to measure from the same points of reference, but now we're going to get on the bike, jump up and down on it a few times just to kind of settle the suspension in, and then sit. Again, it's important to sit directly over the foot pegs and kind of sit somewhat straight up. You want to keep your weight centered on the bike, and over the foot pegs is a good place to be. Now obviously this is a lot easier when you have two people, someone to help you hold the bike, balance it. I don't have anyone here in the shop with me today to help me, so I'm just going to improvise by I'm going to pull the bike forward a little bit and balance myself by holding on to this. But in the past, I have parked beside a pole and just gently hold on to the pole. I try to keep it close to the handlebars to keep my weight. Again, your weight over the foot pegs. Again, if you have someone that can help you, it makes it easier. But for the video's sake, I'm gonna have to do it by myself. So let's do it. Okay, I got my boots and my helmet on, the heavy part of my gear, and I'm gonna show you how to do this real quick. As if you didn't already know, most of you guys already know this, but just in case this one doesn't. And again, it's a lot easier when you have someone that can help you out. So I'm going to have to bounce up and down. Sit directly over the foot peg. And then you would take your reading right there while you're sitting directly over the foot pegs. I'm going to use the camera here to be my eye as I sit on the bike and try to get a measure. I put that tape there so I know where to put the measuring tape to slide it to when I'm on the bike. So let's go ahead and get my reading real quick. Okay, I can take the reading now. I'll look on the camera and see where it's at. Alright, so based on what I saw on the camera there, it was 563 millimeters. That's what it measured with me sitting on the bike. So, take 563, and then our full extension, remember, was 662. We're going to subtract them too, and we get 99. Bam. So this bike is at 99 millimeters race sag. That's where this one is at. Pretty good considering I've never checked it. And what I mean by that is I adjust sag by feel. And you know, in the past that was considered like, you don't do that, you're supposed to break out the measuring tape. What's your number? And I've been doing it like this for years, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more in a minute. But I will say it's been a trend lately. I heard Trey Kennard started doing that with Jet Lawrence's bike, and Sexton when he was racing for Team Honda. They started doing it by feel, and they were surprised at the numbers that they ended up with that the riders actually thought were better versus what they were running, the traditional 105 on everything. You know, they actually started finding out their riders liked anywhere from 99 to about 102 or 103. This one ended up at 99 millimeters with just tuning it by feel, so that's good. But even though I tuned this in by feel, it's still important to get the numbers and check them. It's important to check your race sag and your static sag because that's going to let you know if this spring is out of your range and you need to go to a stiffer spring or a softer spring. Now, within range, there's going to be about 3 spring rates that will fit you, and that's more of a personal preference if you like a little on the stiffer end or a little bit on the softer end. But you still need to make sure you're within that range. So we have our static sag here, 36 millimeters, and we have our race sag here at 99 millimeters. Now I can tell you, like Mitch Payton at Pro Circuit, he suggests that you want to stick with a static sag between 30 to 40 millimeters on 125 to 450 size bikes. Obviously the 85 bikes are going to be a little bit different, and some of your other weird bikes like the old KTMs that didn't have a linkage on it, for them bikes you'll probably have to look in your manual and see what they suggest. But for your standard 125 with the linkage rear end up to a 450, you're going to want anywhere from 30 to 40 millimeter static sag. You're going to want it in that range. Now, some suspension tuners will say anywhere from 25 to 45. And I will say I do like to stick between 30 and 40 myself, but on some bikes the sweet spot kind of got me out of that range a little bit. Maybe I ended up with about 41 or 42 static sag, or maybe 29 millimeter static sag. But I consider them bikes, and when I get out of that range of 30 to 40, I consider when I get out of that range, I'm kind of stepping in the yellow zone a little bit. Yes, it can work, but I try to keep it between 30 and 40 millimeters. Now, the reason that you need to know that is because if to get your race sag proper, you end up with a static sag that's way out of range, well, that's going to let you know if the spring is way too soft or way too firm for you. So let's take a minute to talk about that. All right, the YZ250 two-stroke here, for example, has since the beginning of time, the working range on the sag is between 95 to 105. Anywhere in that range, it's the working range. You can set the race sag anywhere in that range, and it's going to be within its range. With 100 millimeters being the middle ground. Now, for ages, people kind of just set these things up at 100 millimeters and sent them out. It's close enough. That's right in the middle of the range. But what you want to do is you want to set it to 100 millimeters if you're looking to see if the spring is too stiff or too soft for you. So you set your racer sag to 100 millimeters, then you check your static sag. If your static sag is above 40, so let's say it's 45, well, what that's telling us is the spring is too stiff, because we had to loosen up these spanners. Of course, you guys already should know by now, this is where you'll adjust the spring right in here. We had to loosen these up to take enough preload off the spring to achieve 100 millimeter sag. And then when we get off the bike, the static sag is only 45 millimeters, or is 45 millimeters. That's telling us the spring is too stiff for us, and we're going to need to go down a rate or 2 or 3 and get it up in its range. And the opposite is true. If we set the racer sag at 100 millimeters and then we check the static sag, and let's say it's reading 25 or 24, well, that means that we had to tighten that spring up so tight to get the racer sag right for us, that now when we get off the bike, it's picking that bike up real high, and there's just not enough static sag. So that tells us the spring is way too soft for us, and we need to go up a rate 2 or 3. But if the preferred static sag is between 30 to 40, well, there's going to be about 3 spring rates, maybe 4, that when you set the racer sag to 100 millimeters, it's going to fall somewhere within that range. And that's going to be for you to figure out what you like, your preference. If you like it a little bit on the stiffer side, then you go with the heavier spring that still allows the bike to fall in the proper static sag. Or if you like your bike on the softer side, then you can go with the softer spring, but staying within in that range where the racer sag is still falling within that range. This YZ250, the standard racer sag working range is between 95 millimeters and 105 millimeters. So the middle ground is going to be 100 millimeters, and that's where I'm going to set it when I'm checking the spring to see if the static sag falls between 30 to 40 millimeters. I put it right in the middle of the suggested 95 to 105. However, some bikes are different, so you might have to look in your manual and see what your bike specifies. This is for a YZ450, just to give you an example, and they say the standard figure is between 90 to 100 millimeters. So the middle ground for that would be 95 millimeters. So I would set that one to 95 millimeters and then check the static sag to see if it's somewhere in the range between 30 to 40 millimeters, and if it is, I'm good. If it's not, then I'm going to have to change the spring rate to get it into that. When it comes to setting the perfect racer sag, that's going to be done more on the track, and we're going to get to that in a minute. And I guess now is also a good time to note, if you need to change the rear spring rate to achieve the proper race sag and static sag, you're probably going to have to change the fork springs as well. Balance is key. So if you go stiffer on the rear shock spring, and the bike felt balanced before that, but you went stiffer on the rear shock spring, well, you're going to have to go stiffer on the fork springs to keep that balance. And if opposite's true, if you go softer on the shock spring, you're going to have to go softer on the fork springs to keep that balance. And we'll talk more about that a little bit later when we get into the spring area of this series. On most bikes out there, I have found that turning this spanner right here, one full turn, is going to change your race sag about 4 millimeters. So a quarter turn would be about 1 millimeter. All right, got that out of the way. Now, how do I find the perfect racer sag for me? Well, first, after verifying that the spring is not way too stiff or way too soft and it's not out of its range, if it is within the range, meaning the static sag falls between 30 to 40 millimeters, when the racer sag set in the middle ground, which it would be 100 millimeters for this YZ250, at that point, I just set the static sag to about 34 to 36 millimeters on a 252 stroke and about 32 on a 125. And on your 450s and your 250Fs, the 4 strokes, I start them at about 39 to 40 millimeters. And because I have found that typically on the 125s, after you find that perfect setting, the static sag is going to lean more towards the 30 millimeter mark. And on the 450s, after you find that perfect setting, it's going to lean more towards the 40 millimeter mark. And the reason being, obviously, is because it's a heavier bike or a lighter bike. The lighter 125 is going to have less weight on that spring during the static sag when there's no rider on the bike, and the heavier 450 is going to have more weight on the spring, so it's going to have more static sag. I can tell you my last YZ450, the static sag on that bike was 39 millimeters. And my current YZ125, the static sag is 32 millimeters. Also a reminder that some bikes will go past the 30 to 40 millimeter static sag mark and be perfectly fine. Like a lot of your 450s, the perfect setting might take you up to 41 or 42 millimeter static sag. And some of your 125s might dip into the 28 or 29. As long as you don't go past 25 to 45, you're good. But if you can keep it between 30 to 40, you'll be keeping it in a tighter window. So to find the perfect setting, I'll start with the static sag on a 125 at about 32 millimeters. And on a 252 stroke, I'll start them at about 34 to 35. And on your 250F and 454 strokes, I'm going to start them closer to 40, maybe at 40. And take it to the track, see how it feels. And then I tune it by feel. If the back end feels too high, too like it's crawling up my butt, and the back end just feels like it's overpowering the bike, then I might lower the rear end just a little bit. And if the rear end feels too low and it feels like I'm always kissing that bumper or on the edge of kissing that bumper, then I raise it up. And I'm looking for that perfect middle ground. Another thing to pay attention to is how the bike is jumping. If it's jumping front and high, it's usually an indicator that your rear end might be too low. Now obviously high speed and low speed compression can affect that as well, and we'll get to that in the next video. But as far as your sag is concerned, if your rear end is riding too low, it will cause the bike to jump front and high more often than not. And if your rear end is too tall, it'll cause the bike to jump front and low. So keep track of that as you're trying to dial in that perfect sag setting for you. I prefer to set my sag as the rear end. I try to get it as high as I can get it where the bike still feels good. So let's say there's a working range that all feels good to me between, let's say, 102 to 99 millimeters. Anywhere between that racer sag, it feels good. Yes, 102 is going to feel a little bit lower, and 99 is going to feel a little bit taller. But once I get to 98, then the bike becomes unstable. It feels like the back end is overpowering the front end, and it just doesn't feel right. So I'll back it right down to 99 and keep it there. Even though anywhere from 102 to 99 felt good, I'm going to choose to stay on the taller end of that working range. And the reason being is because I want to stay away from the bumper as much as I can. All you have to do is look at any of the fast guys today, but I'm going to say Jet Lawrence and Hunter Lawrence. Notice their bikes sit pretty tall while the rear end while they're riding. Now, it's not overly tall, but it's definitely not sacked out and looking like the rear fender is kissing the rear tire the whole time. You can tell that they're running their sag somewhere around 99, 100. Now I'm not saying set your sag to that, and no, everyone's a little different. All I'm pointing out here is that you want to aim towards the taller end if you can, to stay away from that bumper. Because in my experience, when bikes kick and the rear end kicks, in most situations is because we hit that bumper unexpectedly. Like let's say you're going through a set of whoops and you just kiss that bumper just a little bit. The minute you kiss that bumper unexpectedly, it transfers that energy up and forward and can translate into a kick. Now, when you hit the bumper for the right reasons, because you really smashed into something, well, at that point, all your weight is coming down on that bike at the same time that it's hitting the bumper, and it's not going to kick. But when it hits the bumper, when all your weight's not coming down on the bike at the same time, that's when you get a kick. And the way to keep that from happening is to set your rear end up tall enough where you're not going to hit that rear bumper unexpectedly. So that's why I like to shoot towards the higher range of that when I can. And I know it can get a little bit confusing when I say taller rear end, and a race sag number, a taller rear end is going to be like, let's say 95 is a taller rear end than 105 racer sag, because you have to think about it. It's how much it sags when you sit down. So keep that in mind. A lower number on the racer sag is going to be a taller rear end, and a greater number on the racer sag is going to be a lower rear end. Now, no matter where you set your racer sag, static sag to me is the most important. I can get on somebody's bike that has really stiff springs in it, and that racer sag is just not falling in the range for me. But if the static sag is set properly, if it's set between 30 to 40 millimeters, I'm going to be able to ride the bike. I'm just going to say it feels stiff, but I can ride it. It's behaving properly. Or if it's sprung way too soft for me, and when I sit on it, the back end just sacks down and just sinks real low when I sit on it. However, when I get off the bike, the static sag is between 30 to 40 millimeters. I'm going to be able to ride the bike. I will complain that it's too soft and it feels like I'm just smashing right through the suspension, but I'll be able to ride it. Static sag is the most important thing when it comes to the bike feeling proper. Once that static sag gets out of the range, the bike will get goofy. And the main reason being is because the static sag is real important when you're light on the bike. So let's say you're going through a set of whoops and you get kicked up a little bit, right? And your body weight kind of comes up light on the bike. The wheels are still bouncing through the whoops, but you're kind of like, whoa, you get a little zero gravity feeling for a second. That's when static sag comes into play. When you're light on the bike, is the bike going to do the proper thing on its own without your body weight being smashed into it? If you don't have enough static sag, the bike's going to get real goofy then, or if you have too much, it's going to get goofy. So static sag is real important for when the bike's kind of on its own, when you're having a zero gravity experience, but the wheels are still pretty much on the ground. That's when static sag comes into play, and that's what keeps the bike feeling proper and normal, is if that static sag's in the proper range. So that's why that's more important than racer sag, in my opinion, although they are both important. Okay, now when you're at the track and you're tuning in your racer sag, as you get close to the perfect setting, the smallest changes are going to feel pretty significant. If you're way far out, you might have to turn that thing quite a bit to get what feels different. But once you start getting close to that mark, the smallest change means a lot. And there's a reason why you see I have a little bit of fingernail polish right here, green, and another one over here. There's a reason why, because when I make these changes, sometimes it's just that far of a turn or that far of a turn. It's sometimes put this lug over here. If I bring that one right over here, making it just that much stiffer, is a pretty significant change. Once you're close, you'll be amazed. Now, the reason I like to do it by feel and not just by breaking out the measuring tape is because even though going from here to, like, if I spin it from that lug, if I take this lug right here and I spin it to right there, making it just that much stiffer, which is just a little bit, it's just like tick, a little bit, I'm going to feel that on the track. However, if I break out the measuring tape and check the racer sag, it's probably not going to read a change. It's probably going to give me the same numbers, honestly. But that little bit makes a difference. And this is why I tune them at the track. I look for that perfect setting at the track. Then I'll come home, clean the bike, get all the dirt off of it, because you don't want to be checking racer sag while the bike's all dirty. You don't need that extra weight on the bike. And then I'll see what I ended up with, like I've done right here. I did not know what the racer sag was on this bike. I tuned it by feel. I knew the static sag was in range. I had no clue where the racer sag was. Now I know it's at 99 millimeters. Now when I'm on the track and I'm setting my racer sag and I'm looking for that perfect setting, I don't pay attention so much to how the bike corners. I pay attention to how the rear end is working, and that's where I set it at, because we can tune the pitch of the bike and how it corners up here at the front forks with the fork height and the triple clamps. And generally, as we pitch the bike forward like this, they're going to corner better but be a little bit less stable, and as we pitch the bike back, they're going to not corner quite as good, but they're going to be more stable. Because there are two ways to change the pitch to the bike. It's either raise the rear end to pitch it like this, or lower the front end to pitch it like that, or raise the front end to pitch it like this, or lower the rear end to pitch it like that. So I would rather let the rear end do its own thing and focus on just finding that perfect setting for the rear end alone. So when I'm heavy on the throttle and coming out of a corner and all the weight's being transferred to the rear, that rear end's going to be in the perfect place to allow me to accelerate as fast as I can through all the chop, bumps, rockers, whoops, you name it. And then if I need to bike the corner a little bit quicker or be more stable, instead of lowering the rear end to make to change the pitch to make the bike more stable, or raising the rear end to change the pitch to make the bike corner better, instead of using the rear end to do that, I'm going to do that through the forks, because I want that rear end to be focused on itself when I'm heavy on the throttle. That's the key. So we can change the pitch right up here on the front forks by lowering the forks or raising the forks in the triple clamp. So if we raise the forks in the triple clamp, it's going to lower the front end, and it's going to cause the bike to steer quicker, and it's going to allow it to hold the line better, and more importantly, it's going to allow it to come out of the corner better as we're on the gas if we find that perfect setting. And the opposite's true. If we bring the forks down and we raise the front end, well, that can bring some stability to the front end and make the bike feel more stable going down the straights and maybe even in the corners, but it's not going to be as crisp and as sharp in the corners, or it might want to come out of the corner a little wide. Think of it this way. When you're in a corner, you're mid-corner, you're going through the corner, and then as you're coming out of the corner, you start to gas it. The front end's going to come up. It's going to get light, right? As you're exiting the corner, the front end comes light, and the front end comes up. It's only, unless the front wheel comes off the ground, it's only going to come up as high as the forks can extend. So where we set the forks in the triple clamp is going to choose, or it's going to dictate the chassis, the angle of the pitch as you're on the throttle coming out of the corner. So if the bike's going wide coming out of the corner, you can lower the front end by raising the forks in the clamp and to allow it to stay in the groove as you're coming out of the corner. If it's knifing on you, or if it just seems like it just wants to keep cornering as you're on the gas and like, whoa, I need it to straighten up, it's time to go straight, and the thing just wants to keep laying over, then you can raise the front end by lowering the forks in the clamp a little bit and achieve that. When I'm looking for that perfect fork height adjustment, I not only pay attention to how it corners, but I also pay attention to how it feels going down the straight. The overall balance of the chassis, what I'm looking for, even the way it jumps, it all comes into play. If the front end's a little bit too tall, it's going to jump, for you, it's going to jump a little weird. And the front end's too low, it's going to jump a little bit weird. It's going to feel a little bit weird going through the whoops and the straight. So I take into consideration not only the corners, but also the straights when I'm looking to tune in my fork height to set the overall pitch of the bike. And it's going to be personal preference and what you like, but you have to take them two into consideration and kind of find a happy medium between the two to find that perfect setting. For most of your bikes out there, the standard on the fork height adjustment is anywhere from 0 millimeters to 10 millimeters. And that is measuring from the top of the fork tube right there, not the cap, but the fork tube right here, to the top of the triple clamp. Most of your bikes, anywhere between 0 to 10 millimeters is the working range on that, with 5 millimeters being like the middle ground. This bike right here, I have it set at 5 millimeters. You can see where I'm measuring from the top of the tube there, not the cap, but the tube, to the top of the triple clamp. And it's about 5 millimeters, right? That's where this bike's set at. I can tell you that if I ran it flush at 0 millimeters, and I went from 0 to 2 millimeters, I'm probably not going to notice a big difference. For me, that's out of its range. But as I got closer to 5, or at 5, now going from 5 to 5.5 or to 4.5 is actually it's going to be felt. And if I went from 5 to 6, just 1 millimeter's difference, that's actually a pretty significant change in this bike. It's much like when you're at the gun range shooting at targets. To put it on paper, well, you know, it's pretty easy. You can just kind of aim that general direction. But when you start getting close to bullseye, you really got to aim, just barely move it a little bit to hit that perfect spot. It's the same thing with suspension. As we get closer and closer to bullseye, the adjustments are going to become smaller and smaller to narrow in that perfect setting. When you're getting close, you can be so close to perfection and not even know it unless you try. So sometimes just a 0.5 millimeter difference is going to be what it takes to get it perfection. And here on the rear end, sometimes just spinning the spinner one lug over, just literally just that much, can be what it takes to get your bike into perfection. So keep that in mind, that you have to do even the smallest changes once you get close to find that perfect point. I know on this bike I have tried 5.5. I was actually juggling between 5.5 and 5, and I ended up just choosing 5 for the stability of it. It's a good natural feeling. It corners good, yet it still has good stability. 5 millimeters for this bike is where I'm at. But you're not going to know unless you try. You have to get to the track and play around with it a little bit. I do like to adjust them with digital calipers. That way I can get them dialed in really good and accurate, because you want the left side equal with the right side, obviously. And one important thing to note while you're tuning in the fork height is definitely make sure you bleed your forks. Bleed them quite often. You know, you have this little screw right here where you can let the air out of the forks. So yeah, you want to bleed them. Traditionally, people say to bleed them when they're on the stand, and that way it has an atmosphere pressure. It's a neutral pressure. The issue I have with that is once I get on the track, the forks are going to heat up, and now you're going to have a positive pressure. And I can't stand positive pressure in forks, and I'm not the only one. There's a lot of riders out there that have complained about positive pressure in the fork. I'm better with negative pressure than I am positive pressure, because it'll cause the front end to ride a little high. It'll cause my front end to jump out of ruts, and it'll make it just feels weird. Negative pressure I'm okay with. So what I do at the track is I actually just take the bike off the stand, let the bike sit on its own wheels, and without me sitting on the bike, and then I bleed the forks, because I know once I get on the track they're going to heat up, and they heat up pretty quick. Within a lap or two they've already had the heat, and they're going to pump up to about atmosphere pressure. And you can try it out yourself. Go ahead and bleed the forks on the stand, go out and do a moto, come back and take it and then bleed the forks again. You're going to hear it go psst, and then bleed the forks while the bike is on the ground. Go out, do a moto, come back, put it back on the stand, and take the screw out, and you're probably not going to hear any air come in or out, because when you bleed it while it's on the ground, it's going to neutralize once it gets on the track and gets up to temperature. So that's how I bleed my forks. It's very important to bleed the air out of your forks, at least at the beginning of the day, although I like to do it a few times throughout the day. Companies like Motion Pro sell these quick bleeders right here, where all you got to do is press a button and it'll bleed the air out of your forks. I used them for a lot of years. However, I started having issues with every so often they would get clogged up or whatever, and they would start shooting oil up, and I'd get oil all around here. And so I've gone back to doing it the old-fashioned way with just a screw. Takes a little bit of time, but it gets it done. She never has that issue. She doesn't ride as hard as I do, so I just leave them Motion Pros on hers. Alright, spring brates. There's going to be about 3 to 4 different spring brates that's going to allow you to get the proper race sag and static sag at the same time. It's going to be personal preference. If you're a faster rider, obviously you're going to want stiffer, and if you're a slow rider, probably softer. And you know, personal preference also comes in that. Also, what type of terrain you're in. We're going to save that for the next video, part 3, just because this one's getting a little bit longer. But part 3, we're going to dive right into the spring rates and balance between front and rear on the spring rates. We'll also be discussing the compression clickers and the rebound clickers, high speed and low speed. We still need to get into the tire PSI, what PSI should use, as well as wheelbase that can be changed by changing your rear sprockets on the rear. We also cannot forget fork oil volume to try to control bottoming out on the forks. And in the last video of this series, we'll be trying to put all this together as a package. How to tune your bike in, where to start, what to look for, that kind of stuff. But we're going to save that for the last video. It's probably going to be the toughest one to put together, but I'm going to do the best I can. Yesterday was a great day of riding. Went over to Clay Gawley MX over in Mayaca, Florida. That is an awesome track. Private track, so you have to be invited to go in there. But that was a great day. I actually posted a GoPro video of it. It's the last video I posted, if you want to check that out. It's just some GoPro of us going around the track. Nothing special, but that was a good day. Next week, I'm looking to go to Spider MX on Saturday. You know, obviously we're in Florida in summertime, so the weather plays a huge role where we go and where we don't go. But that's the plan as of yet. I hope all you guys had a great weekend riding this weekend. I hope you guys are enjoying your Sunday. I hope you enjoyed the motocross race yesterday. That was awesome. And hope you get a good weekend of riding next weekend. Stay tuned for part 3 of this series. I'll catch you then.